The rain was relentless, pounding against the windows of my small, secluded cabin in the woods. I had chosen this place for its isolation, far from the chaos of the city, where I could focus on my writing and forget about the world. But that night, the world came knocking at my door. I was sitting by the fireplace, a cup of tea in hand, when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible knock. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, more insistent this time. I set my cup down and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. Standing on my porch, drenched and shivering, was a woman unlike any I had ever seen. Her skin was a pale, almost translucent blue, and her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. She was holding a small child, no more than a toddler, who shared her otherworldly features. Both of them looked exhausted, and the woman was clearly injured, clutching her side where a dark stain was spreading through her tattered clothing. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My mind raced with questions. Who were they? Where had they come from? And more importantly, what did they want from me? But as I looked into the woman's eyes, I saw something that made my decision for me: desperation, fear, and a silent plea for help. I opened the door, and the woman stumbled inside, nearly collapsing under the weight of her child. I caught her just in time, guiding her to the couch by the fire. She was trembling, whether from the cold or from pain, I couldn't tell. The child clung to her, his wide eyes darting around the room, taking in his new surroundings. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. Her accent was strange, unlike anything I had ever heard before, but her words were clear enough. I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. "You're hurt," I said, stating the obvious. "Let me get you something for that." I hurried to the bathroom, grabbing the first aid kit I kept under the sink. When I returned, the woman was trying to soothe her child, who had started to cry softly. I knelt beside her, opening the kit and pulling out some bandages and antiseptic. "Can I?" I asked, gesturing to her wound. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, pulling aside her torn clothing to reveal a deep gash in her side. It looked like it had been made by some kind of blade, and it was clear that it needed more than just basic first aid. But for now, I did what I could, cleaning the wound and applying a bandage to stop the bleeding. As I worked, the woman watched me intently, her glowing eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Why are you helping us?" she asked suddenly, her voice stronger now. I paused, considering her question. The truth was, I didn't really know. Maybe it was because they looked so helpless, or maybe it was because I had always been a sucker for a good story. Whatever the reason, I knew I couldn't turn them away. "Because you need help," I said simply. "And because I can." She nodded, as if that answer was enough for her. "My name is Lyra," she said. "And this is my son, Cale." "I'm Ethan," I replied, offering her a small smile. "Welcome to my home." For the next few hours, I did my best to make them comfortable. I found some old clothes that would fit Lyra, and I managed to cobble together a makeshift bed for Cale using some blankets and pillows. Lyra refused to rest until her son was settled, but eventually, exhaustion won out, and she fell into a deep sleep. As I watched them, I couldn't help but wonder what had brought them here. Lyra's injury, the fear in her eyes, the way she had looked over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow, it all pointed to something far more dangerous than a simple accident. But for now, they were safe, and that was all that mattered. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside, the cabin was warm and quiet. I sat by the fire, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. Whatever had brought Lyra and Cale to my doorstep, I knew one thing for certain: my life was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Cale's soft giggles. I had fallen asleep in the armchair by the fire, and as I opened my eyes, I saw the little boy playing with a small, glowing orb that seemed to hover in midair. Lyra was watching him with a tired smile, but her eyes were alert, scanning the room as if she expected danger to burst through the door at any moment. "Good morning," I said, stretching and trying to shake off the stiffness from sleeping in the chair. Lyra nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you again for your kindness, Ethan. We are in your debt." I waved off her gratitude, still unsure how to handle the situation. "It's no trouble. How are you feeling?" She glanced down at her bandaged side. "Better, thanks to you. But we cannot stay here long. It is not safe, for you or for us." I frowned, sitting up straighter. "What do you mean? What's going on, Lyra? Who are you, really?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to Kale, who was now chasing the glowing orb around the room. "We are, not from this world," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. "Not from this world? You mean, you're aliens?" She nodded, her expression serious. "Our planet is called Illyria. It is far from here, in a galaxy you would not recognize. We came to Earth seeking refuge, but we were pursued by those who wish us harm." I felt a chill run down my spine, despite the warmth of the fire. "Who's after you? And why?" Lyra's eyes darkened, and she looked away. "There are those on Illyria who believe that our kind should not mix with others. They see us as a threat to their power, and they will stop at nothing to eliminate us. We thought we could escape them, but they followed us here." I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Aliens? Pursuers from another galaxy? It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, not something that would happen in my quiet little cabin in the woods. "But why come here?" I asked. "Why Earth?" Lyra sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Earth is unique. It is a place where many different species have sought refuge over the centuries. It is far enough from Illyria that we hoped we could disappear here. But we were wrong." I shook my head, still trying to wrap my mind around everything. "So what now? What are you going to do?" Lyra looked at me, her eyes filled with determination. "We must keep moving. We cannot stay in one place for too long, or they will find us. But before we go, there is something you should know." She reached into a small pouch she had been carrying and pulled out a strange, crystalline object. It glowed faintly, pulsing with a soft, blue light. "This is a shard of the Illyrian star," she said, holding it out to me. "It is a powerful artifact, one that can open portals between worlds. It is why they are after us. They want this shard, and they will do anything to get it." I stared at the shard, feeling a strange pull towards it. "Why are you showing this to me?" "Because you have shown us kindness," Lyra said simply. "And because I believe that you may be able to help us. The shard, it reacts to those with a pure heart. It has chosen you, Ethan." I blinked, unsure of what to say. "Chosen me? For what?" Lyra's expression was grave. "To protect it. To keep it safe from those who would use it for evil. If they were to get their hands on it, they could open portals to other worlds, spreading destruction and chaos. You must not let that happen." I felt a weight settle in my chest, the enormity of what she was asking pressing down on me. "But I'm just a writer. I'm not a hero. I don't know how to fight, or how to protect something like this." Lyra reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "You do not need to be a warrior, Ethan. The shard will guide you. It will show you what you need to do. But you must be willing to accept this responsibility." I looked down at the shard, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. Despite everything, I knew that I couldn't turn away. Lyra and Kale needed my help, and now, it seemed, so did the entire universe. "All right," I said finally, taking the shard from her. "I'll do it. I'll protect the shard. Lyra smiled, a look of relief crossing her face. Thank you, Ethan. You have no idea how much this means to us. As I held the shard in my hand, I felt a surge of energy course through me, as if the artifact was awakening something deep within. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: my life was never going to be the same. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Lyra and Kale stayed with me, but it was clear that they were on edge, constantly watching for any sign of danger. I did my best to make them feel at home, but the weight of the shard's responsibility hung over me like a dark cloud. I spent hours studying the shard, trying to understand its power. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, pulsing with a life of its own. Sometimes, when I held it, I could almost hear a faint hum, as if it was trying to communicate with me. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't decipher its secrets. Lyra told me more about Illyria and the conflict that had driven her and Kale to Earth. It was a world of advanced technology and ancient magic, where different factions vied for control of the Illyrian star. The shard she had given me was one of several, each holding a piece of the star's power. If all the shards were brought together, they could open a portal to any world, at any time. But the shards were also dangerous. In the wrong hands, they could be used to unleash unimaginable destruction. That was why Lyra and her people had gone to such lengths to protect them, scattering them across the galaxy to keep them out of the hands of their enemies. As the days passed, I began to notice strange things happening around the cabin. The air would grow heavy, and the shadows would seem to move on their own. At night, I would hear whispers, faint and indistinct, but always there, just on the edge of my hearing. It was as if the shard was drawing something to us, something dark and malevolent. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a loud crash from outside. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding, and saw a figure standing in the yard. It was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. Its eyes glowed with a cold, blue light, and it was holding a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and a rifle. Lyra was at my side in an instant, her face pale. "They've found us," she whispered, her voice trembling. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my mind racing. "What do we do?" Lyra grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "We have to leave. Now." I nodded, quickly gathering what supplies I could. Kale was already awake, his eyes wide with fear. Lyra scooped him up, holding him close as we made our way to the back door. But as we stepped outside, we were met by another figure, this one even more terrifying than the first. It was clad in dark armor, its face hidden behind a helmet that seemed to absorb the light around it. In its hand, it held a weapon that crackled with energy, and it was pointing it directly at us. Lyra froze, her eyes wide with fear. "Ethan, run," she shouted, pushing me towards the woods. But before I could move, the armored figure raised its weapon, and a blast of energy shot towards us. I barely had time to react, diving to the ground and pulling Lyra and Kale with me. The blast missed us by inches, slamming into the cabin and sending a shower of sparks into the air. I scrambled to my feet, pulling Lyra and Kale up with me. "This way!" I shouted, leading them into the woods. We ran, the sound of pursuit close behind us. The forest was dense, the trees closing in around us as we pushed through the underbrush. I could hear the sound of the pursuers crashing through the woods, their weapons firing blasts of energy that lit up the night. Lyra was struggling to keep up, her injury slowing her down. Kale was crying, clinging to her as we ran. I knew we couldn't keep this up for long, we needed a plan, and fast. As we ran, I felt the shard in my pocket begin to grow warm, almost hot to the touch. I pulled it out, holding it in my hand as we ran. The shard's glow intensified, and suddenly, I felt a strange pull, as if it was guiding me. "Follow me," I shouted, veering off the path and into a dense thicket. Lyra and Kale followed, their eyes wide with fear. The shard's glow grew brighter, and suddenly, we burst into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a strange, circular pattern etched into the ground, glowing with the same blue light as the shard. I didn't know what it was, but I knew we had to trust the shard. "Stand in the center," I shouted, pulling Lyra and Kale into the circle. As soon as we stepped into the circle, the ground beneath us began to glow, and I felt a strange sensation, as if we were being pulled in all directions at once. The world around us seemed to blur, and then, with a flash of light, we were gone. When the light faded, we were no longer in the woods. We were standing in a strange, otherworldly landscape, with towering crystal spires and a sky that shimmered with colors I had never seen before. Lyra gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. "We're on Illyria," she whispered. I looked around, my heart pounding. The shard had brought us here, to Lyra's home world. But as I looked at the strange, beautiful landscape, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. We had escaped the pursuers, but I knew that our journey was far from over. The air on Illyria was different, thinner, with a faint metallic taste that lingered on my tongue. The ground beneath our feet was covered in a fine, crystalline dust that sparkled in the light of the twin suns overhead. The towering spires of the city loomed in the distance, their surfaces reflecting the light in a dazzling array of colors. Lyra stood beside me, her expression a mix of awe and apprehension. "We need to get to the Crystal City," she said, her voice low. "It's the only place where we can find help." I nodded, still trying to process the fact that we were on an alien planet. Kale clung to his mother's hand, his wide eyes taking in the strange surroundings. The shard in my pocket felt warm, almost as if it was alive, pulsing with a steady rhythm that matched the beat of my heart. We began to make our way towards the city, the crystalline ground crunching beneath our feet. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The landscape was eerily silent, with no signs of life other than the occasional flutter of strange, translucent creatures that darted through the air. After what felt like hours, we finally reached the outskirts of the Crystal City. The spires were even more impressive up close, their surfaces smooth and flawless, as if they had been carved from a single piece of crystal. The city itself was a maze of narrow streets and towering buildings, all made from the same shimmering material. As we entered the city, I noticed that it was eerily quiet. There were no signs of life, no people walking the streets or going about their daily business. The only sound was the faint hum of energy that seemed to emanate from the buildings themselves. "Where is everyone?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty streets. Lyra's expression was grim. "Something is wrong. The city should be bustling with life. This is not normal." We continued to make our way through the city, the shard's glow growing brighter with each step. It was as if it was guiding us, leading us towards something, or someone. Finally, we reached a large, circular plaza in the center of the city. In the middle of the plaza was a massive crystal obelisk, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with light. Lyra's eyes widened as she saw the obelisk. "The heart of Illyria," she whispered. "It's the source of the city's power. If it's been corrupted." She didn't finish the sentence, but I could see the fear in her eyes. We approached the obelisk cautiously, the shard's glow now so bright that it was almost blinding. As we got closer, I noticed that the carvings on the obelisk were moving, shifting and changing as if they were alive. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the plaza, deep and resonant. "Who dares to approach the heart of Illyria?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I am Lyra of the Illyrian Guard, and I seek the counsel of the elders." There was a moment of silence, and then the voice spoke again. "The elders are no more. The heart has been corrupted, and the city has fallen. You should not have come here." Lyra's face paled, and she took a step back. "What do you mean? What happened?" The voice was silent for a moment, and then the ground beneath us began to tremble. The carvings on the obelisk shifted, forming a face that was both beautiful and terrifying, with eyes that glowed with a cold, blue light. "The heart has been taken by the void," the face said, its voice filled with sorrow. "The void seeks to consume all, to spread its darkness across the universe. You carry a shard of the Illyrian star. It is the only hope we have left." I felt a chill run down my spine as the face's eyes turned to me. "You must take the shard to the Temple of Light," it said. "Only there can the shard be purified, and the heart restored." Lyra nodded, her expression determined. "We will do it. We will save Illyria." The face's expression softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hope in its eyes. "Go, then. But beware, the void is strong, and it will stop at nothing to prevent you from reaching the temple." As the face faded back into the obelisk, the ground stopped trembling, and the plaza fell silent once more. Lyra turned to me, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to get to the Temple of Light," she said. "It's our only chance." I nodded, gripping the shard tightly. "Then let's go." We left the plaza, the shard's glow guiding us through the empty streets of the Crystal City. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the void was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. But we had no choice. We had to reach the temple, no matter what. The fate of Illyria, and perhaps the entire universe, depended on it. The journey to the Temple of Light was fraught with danger. The once beautiful streets of the Crystal City were now filled with shadows that seemed to move on their own, and the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. The shard in my hand pulsed with a steady rhythm, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Lyra led the way, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Kale clung to her hand, his small face filled with fear but also determination. I followed close behind, the shard's warmth giving me a strange sense of comfort despite the peril we were in. As we neared the edge of the city, the landscape began to change. The crystalline spires gave way to a barren, rocky terrain, with jagged cliffs and deep crevices that seemed to stretch on forever. In the distance, I could see the Temple of Light, a massive structure that seemed to be made entirely of light itself, its surface shimmering with a golden glow. But between us and the temple was a vast, dark chasm, filled with swirling shadows that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. The only way across was a narrow, crumbling bridge that looked like it could collapse at any moment. Lyra hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she studied the bridge. "This is a trap," she said quietly. "The void knows we're here." I nodded, feeling a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "We don't have a choice. We have to cross." Lyra took a deep breath, then nodded. "Stay close, and whatever you do, don't look down." We stepped onto the bridge, the ancient stones creaking beneath our weight. The shadows in the chasm below seemed to rise up, reaching for us with tendrils of darkness. I focused on the shard, its light pushing back the shadows and giving us a clear path. But as we reached the middle of the bridge, the shadows attacked. They surged up from the chasm, forming into twisted, monstrous shapes that lunged at us with terrifying speed. Lyra reacted instantly, pulling a small, glowing weapon from her belt and firing bursts of energy at the creatures. I held the shard out in front of me, its light driving the shadows back. Kale screamed as one of the creatures got too close, but Lyra was there, shielding him with her body and firing at the creature until it dissipated into nothingness. We fought our way across the bridge, the shadows pressing in on all sides, until finally, we reached the other side. The Temple of Light loomed before us, its golden glow a stark contrast to the darkness we had just escaped. But as we approached the entrance, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a tall, imposing figure clad in dark armor, its face hidden behind a helmet that seemed to absorb the light around it. "The void has been waiting for you," the figure said, its voice cold and menacing. "You cannot win. The shard will be ours." Lyra stepped forward, her weapon raised. You will not take it, she said, her voice filled with defiance. The figure laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. You are brave, but bravery will not save you. Before I could react, the figure lunged at us, moving with inhuman speed. Lyra fired her weapon, but the figure dodged the blasts with ease, closing the distance between us in an instant. I held the shard out, its light flaring as the figure reached for it. But then, something unexpected happened. The shard's light intensified, enveloping the figure in a blinding glow. The figure screamed, a sound of pure agony, as the light consumed it, tearing it apart until there was nothing left but a faint wisp of smoke. Lyra and I stared at the spot where the figure had been, both of us breathing heavily. What just happened? I asked, my voice trembling. Lyra shook her head, her eyes wide with shock. The shard, it protected us. It has a power I've never seen before. We didn't have time to dwell on it. The entrance to the temple was just ahead, and we could feel the pull of the shard growing stronger. We stepped inside, the golden light of the temple enveloping us. The interior of the temple was breathtaking, with walls that seemed to be made of pure light and a floor that shimmered like liquid gold. In the center of the temple was a pedestal, and on top of it was a crystal similar to the shard, but much larger and more powerful. This is the heart of Illyria, Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. We need to place the shard in the pedestal. I stepped forward, the shard's light merging with the glow of the heart. As I placed the shard on the pedestal, the entire temple was filled with a blinding light, and I felt a surge of energy unlike anything I had ever experienced. The light faded, and when I opened my eyes, the heart of Illyria was whole once more, its surface pulsing with a steady, golden light. The shadows that had plagued the city were gone, replaced by a sense of peace and tranquility. Lyra smiled, tears of relief in her eyes. We did it, she said. We saved Illyria. I nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment that I had never felt before. But as I looked at the heart, I knew that our journey was far from over. The void was still out there, and it would not stop until it had consumed everything. But for now, we had won. And that was enough. As we left the temple, the shard's light still glowing in my hand, I knew that my life would never be the same. I had been thrust into a world of danger and magic, of heroes and villains, and I had emerged stronger for it. And as I looked at Lyra and Kale, I knew that I had found something even more important, a family. Together, we would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and we would do it as one. The end.